The slap landed harder than anyone expected. Sharp, flat, echoing through the cabin like someone had dropped a tray. It wasn't a bump or a tap. It was deliberate. The kind of slap that makes people go quiet, but still pretend they didn't see it. Walter Langston didn't react. He didn't shout. He didn't even blink. He just looked at the flight attendant like she'd broken something invisible and important. Across the aisle, a man in a navy suit glanced up, startled. The woman in pearls next to him lowered her glass of wine, eyes wide. But neither of them said a word. No one did. The flight attendant, Marla Jennings, straightened her uniform and raised her voice. "You are not allowed to use devices when I'm talking to you." Walter's hand, the one she slapped, rested calmly on his tray table. His other hand, slower now, reached for his phone. His expression didn't change. He typed one line, "Flight 783, Cabin 1A, physical contact, proceed." Then he placed the phone face down, turned toward the window, and looked out. Not at the clouds, but beyond them. They didn't know who he was. They saw an older black man in a gray blazer, traveling alone, quiet, polite, no designer briefcase, no Rolex. Just the kind of person they'd politely ignore. What they didn't see was that he wasn't just sitting in 1A. He helped build the system that powered the entire airline, and now it had just been activated. Walter Langston didn't look like someone who could stop a machine mid-flight, and that's exactly how he liked it. He sat quietly in 1A, one hand resting on his phone, the other still, open, palm up on the tray table, where Marla Jennings had just slapped it minutes earlier. The heat had faded. The sting hadn't. From the back, he probably looked like any retired gentleman. Clean-shaven, short salt and pepper hair, smooth dark skin. His gray blazer was pressed but plain, his black shirt buttoned to the top, no tie. No flash, no logos. Invisible. And in his world, invisibility was power. Walter had spent the last 40 years designing systems most people would never hear about until they failed. Retirement funds, infrastructure safety nets, ethical compliance algorithms. He'd never been on the cover of a magazine, never taken a selfie at a board meeting. But in the world of aviation policy, when Walter Langston moved, the ground shifted. Today was supposed to be quiet. He'd flown out of San Francisco that afternoon for a private ethics review meeting in Atlanta. No entourage, no assistants. He booked his own ticket, used the same login he'd had since the Sky Pension days. He even pre-selected a vegetarian meal, like he always did. That part still got to him. The meal. He wasn't upset she got it wrong. Mistakes happen. What shook him was how quickly she assumed he didn't belong. That he had somehow snuck into first class. That asking for a meal he'd already reserved was a problem. That she hit him. Walter had served on federal ethics boards, helped design the very system this airline used to measure passenger conduct. And yet, in her eyes, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, all she saw was an old black man with no business asking for more than what he was given. She didn't know he was the one who signed off on the flight trust ethics protocol they'd all been trained under. She didn't know that he could bring a $190 million machine to a crawl with nothing but a sentence. But she would. They all would. And the plane hadn't even left the gate. The cabin had returned to normal, or at least that's what everyone pretended. The engines hummed low. Ice clinked in cocktail glasses. Pages of magazines turned with lazy fingers, but no one had forgotten what they saw. They just didn't want to be the first to say it. Marla Jennings moved down the aisle with practiced ease, handing out menus and fake smiles like nothing had happened. Her voice carried just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Please, let me know if you need anything, sir," she said to a man in 1C, her tone sugar slick. He nodded, avoiding her eyes. When she reached the galley, she let out a breath, sharp, annoyed. Her lips curled into a smirk as she leaned against the counter and muttered, "He probably printed that ticket off some friend's phone. You know how they try to game the system." The younger flight attendant beside her, Avery Brooks froze. Her eyes flicked toward the cabin. Marla shook her head. "First class used to mean something," she whispered. "Now anyone with a rewards code thinks they belong here." Avery said nothing. In 1A, Walter Langston remained still. His breathing was even, posture straight, but his shoulders carried a quiet weight. He had heard every word. He always did. He didn't turn, didn't move, but the silence spoke for everyone. No one had asked if he was okay. No one had questioned why a grown man was slapped in first class. They saw it, heard it, felt the air change, but no one stood up. And Walter knew why. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they were afraid of breaking the comfort of complicity. He'd seen it before. In boardrooms, in policy meetings, in churches. The moment a line is crossed, and no one draws it back. That moment had passed now, and it didn't belong to Marla anymore. It belonged to everyone who sat there and let it happen. And as the plane began to taxi forward, Walter Langston wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about restoration and how silence, like systems, can be rebuilt from the inside. 3,000 miles away, a phone vibrated on a glass desk. It was a private line. No ringtone, no ID, just a soft pulse and a single word. Proceed. Across from the phone sat a woman in a navy suit, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Her name was Lena Hart, Senior Ethics Officer for the Flight Trust Protocol, a federal ethics system piloted at 7 major U.S. airports. She didn't need to ask who had sent it. Only one person had the clearance to trigger that message. She turned to her assistant. "Pull Airline 783. Gate activity, pre-boarding interactions, crew manifest. Everything." Within minutes, the dashboard lit up. Internal logs, cabin crew assignments, time-stamped footage from boarding, and one name, blinking red at the top of the screen: Walter Langston. Lena's lips tightened. She stood, stepped into a secured conference room, and picked up a direct line to the FAA. "This is Flight Trust Command. We're issuing a temporary ethics freeze on Skylink Airways. Immediate effect. 3 international hubs. Ground all scheduled takeoffs within the next hour. No questions, no delays." The man on the other end simply replied, "Understood." Back on Flight 783, no one knew what had just begun. The plane was still taxiing slowly, inching toward the runway. Marla Jennings was in the galley, fixing coffee and humming to herself, completely unaware that her name had just entered a federal review queue. In 1A, Walter remained silent. But beneath his calm exterior, the air around him had shifted. Subtle, but real. He didn't need to make a scene. The system he helped build was already in motion, and he knew exactly how it worked, because he wrote it. Across 3 airports, flights began pausing for unexplained reasons. Fuel trucks were redirected. Gate assignments scrambled. Supervisors opened emails marked, "Flight Trust Alert. Level 2 ethics violation pending review." The news hadn't broken. The story hadn't leaked. But something bigger than a headline was happening. And Walter Langston, he was just getting started. Marla Jennings wasn't done. She moved through the aisle like nothing had happened, like she hadn't slapped a man's hand in front of a dozen silent witnesses. Her tray rattled with drinks, her smile stiff and mechanical. But her voice carried sharp edges, just loud enough for others to catch. "I've worked first class for 12 years, she muttered to the woman in 3D. "You get a feel for people who don't belong. It's always the ones who act entitled before takeoff." The woman gave a polite chuckle but looked away. Back in the galley, Marla leaned against the counter with a smug huff. "He probably used someone else's miles. You know the type. Quiet until they cause problems." Avery Brooks, the junior flight attendant, stood across from her, arms crossed. She didn't respond. "He didn't even flinch when I raised my voice," Marla went on. "That's what tells me he's used to people letting him get away with stuff." Avery finally spoke. "Or maybe," she said softly, "he's just used to being talked down to." Marla's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Avery backed off. "Nothing." Meanwhile, in seat 1A, Walter didn't move. He hadn't spoken a single word since the slap. His phone remained face down on his tray, his eyes locked on the clouds drifting past the window. The cabin around him hummed with quiet avoidance. People scrolled on their phones, opened novels they couldn't focus on, adjusted blankets they didn't need. No one looked his way. And still, no one said anything. Not the man in 1C who saw it happen. Not the woman in 2A who gasped but stayed quiet. Not the college student who reached for her phone, then changed her mind. The kind of silence that wraps itself in false comfort. The kind that lets things happen, then forgets them before landing. But Walter didn't forget. He never did. The systems he built weren't just about money or infrastructure. They were built to remember what people wanted to ignore. And as the plane kept moving toward the sky, the real weight of what had happened wasn't behind them. It was just beginning to settle in. 10 years ago, Walter Langston stood in front of a Senate subcommittee with a single mission: build a system that made ethics traceable and enforceable. What came out of that hearing would become known as the Flight Trust Ethics Protocol, a framework used by airlines, federal agencies, and airport authorities to track crew behavior, flag violations, and suspend unethical actors before lawsuits ever made the news. It wasn't perfect, but it was enforceable. And Walter had written its backbone line by line. He didn't need credit. He just needed it to work. Now, sitting silently in seat 1A of Flight 783, he watched it quietly begin to do exactly that. While the cabin crew smiled and poured drinks, encrypted flags were already pulsing through internal compliance dashboards across the aviation network. Every movement Marla made, every word she said, every time-stamped second since the slap was now under review. And she had no idea. Walter didn't look like a systems engineer or a policy architect, but that's what made him dangerous. He'd learned years ago that power wasn't in shouting. It was in designing rules that didn't ask for permission to respond. At 63, he'd served on more than a dozen federal oversight panels, advised 4 transportation secretaries, built trust funds for airline pensions, sat quietly at conference tables while louder men talked over him, then signed the approvals they needed to stay in business. He was never the loudest, but he was always the last voice in the room. And now, Marla's voice, sharp, smug, careless, was on record. He didn't need revenge. He didn't even need an apology. He just needed the system to do what it was built for, and that's what made this different. Because unlike most passengers who are ignored, dismissed, or humiliated in silence, Walter Langston didn't need anyone to believe him. The system already did. And by the time this flight landed, everyone else would too. At exactly 3:47 p.m. Eastern, a secure call line opened at the Department of Transportation. The caller didn't say his name. He didn't need to. A quiet male voice simply said, "Protocol 19B, Flight 783, Cabin 1A." The man on the other end, a regional director with 27 years in aviation compliance, straightened in his chair. He muted the football game playing on the small TV in the corner of his office. "Understood," he replied, his voice sharper now. "Initiating escalation tier?" The answer came in 2 words. "Full integrity." Click. Within 90 seconds, the system sprang to life. Data nodes connected. Redundant servers lit up. Internal review teams were notified under classified protocol. At 3 major airports, Denver, Dallas, and Atlanta, an automatic delay hit 27 outgoing flights from Skylink Airways. The delay code didn't mention weather or crew shortage. It simply read, "Temporary ethical hold. LCI tier violation under investigation." LCI, Loyalty Compliance Index. It wasn't just a rating. It was a federal gatekeeping system tied to $3.1 billion in interbank loyalty valuations. And Walter Langston was the final override authority behind it. In Washington, A mid-level FAA official stared at her terminal as alerts rolled in. She picked up the phone. "Sir, we have a Level 1 LCI integrity lock. Source key verified. Langston. Confirmed biometric trigger." The man on the other end, the Deputy Director of Aviation Ethics, froze. "Walter Langston?" "Yes, sir." Oh my God. Back on the plane, Seat 1A remained still. Walter hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His single-line message had already pinged 4 oversight agencies, locked 18 loyalty systems mid-redemption, and triggered a Tier 2 ethics audit on Skylink's entire cabin crew database. The best part? No one on that flight had a clue. Marla Jennings was still pouring drinks, still telling jokes to 2B about entitled passengers with no sense of class. Avery Brooks, quiet in the galley, checked her work tablet. The screen lagged, then froze. She frowned. That's weird. She tried to reopen the crew dashboard. It crashed. So did the passenger lookup and the loyalty database. Then came the email. Urgent. Flight Trust Tier Violation. Flight 783. Crew activity flagged. Temporary freeze in progress. Further contact restricted. Avery's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned and looked toward the front of the cabin. Walter Langston was still staring out the window. Peaceful. Still. But the air around him was different now. Thicker. Like the cabin itself knew it had become the center of something far larger than turbulence. In the control room of Skylink HQ, a red light began blinking on the wall of the operations floor. 2 executives stood. One grabbed his phone. Another walked briskly toward legal. This isn't a glitch," he whispered. "It's Langston." And that was when the panic started. Captain Jim Harlan didn't usually flinch at alerts mid-taxi. He'd flown for 29 years, logged over 12,000 hours, and knew the rhythm of airport delays like a song. But this alert was different. It came through the encrypted pilot interface, flashing a code he hadn't seen in over a decade. Flight Trust Override. Hold position. Await clearance. He stared at the screen, then looked over at his first officer. "You ever seen one of these?" The younger man shook his head slowly. "Not in training. I thought Flight Trust wasn't even active yet." "It is," Jim muttered. "Just not for us. Not unless someone upstairs pulls the cord." He picked up the cockpit phone and dialed air control. "This is Flight 783. We just received a Flight Trust hold code. Can you confirm?" There was a long pause, then a clipped response. "Hold position, Captain. Do not proceed to runway. Further instructions coming from Federal Compliance." Back in the cabin, the engines softened. The motion stopped. Passengers stirred, glancing out the windows, confused. "Why aren't we taking off? Is something wrong with the plane?" No announcement. The air turned stiff. In row 2, a man stood to open the overhead bin. Marla Jennings snapped, "Sir, please stay seated. We'll be moving shortly." But her voice cracked. She didn't know why the plane had stopped either. Her earpiece remained silent. The crew dashboard was still frozen. Her access badge had even blinked red when she tapped the cockpit panel. In 1A, Walter didn't move. But his presence had shifted. He was no longer a quiet old man in a window seat. He was the reason everything had stopped. Passengers didn't know that yet, but they could feel it. And for the first time since takeoff, every eye slowly turned toward him, not in suspicion, but in silent, growing curiosity. Something was happening, and it wasn't turbulence. 10 minutes passed, then 15. No one said it, but every passenger knew something was wrong. The flight crew whispered near the galley. Marla's hands shook slightly as she checked her earpiece again. Still nothing. Then came the knock. Not on the cockpit door, on the forward cabin entry. 3 hard, deliberate knocks. A moment later, it opened. 2 uniformed federal compliance officers stepped inside, followed by a man in a black blazer holding a sealed leather folder. "Flight 783?" the man asked quietly. Captain Jim Harlan nodded. "That's us." The man didn't even look at the captain. He turned to the crew. "By authority of the Flight Trust Oversight Division, All cabin crew are to disarm and step off the aircraft immediately. You are under temporary operational suspension pending investigation." The words hit like thunder. Marla's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Avery froze, her face pale. "Excuse me?" the captain asked. "Who authorized this?" The agent held up the leather folder. Inside was a federal override order, signed Walter T. Langston. And just like that, every head in the cabin turned to seat 1A. Walter remained seated, calm as ever. But something was different now. His presence was no longer passive. It was active, recognized, real. Passengers stared in silence. A few gasped. The man in 2A whispered, "Wait, Langston? The Langston?" No one needed confirmation. Walter slowly turned, made eye contact with the man, and gave a polite nod. That was all it took. Phones came out, mouths dropped open. Marla stumbled back from the cockpit door, no longer the one in control. The very man she slapped was the one who'd built the system that just removed her from her job. As the flight attendants were escorted off, Walter finally spoke. Just once. He looked toward Marla and said, evenly, "Systems remember what people forget." Then he turned back to the window and waited. The plane never took off. It was taxied back to the gate, silent and strange. No crew announcements, no explanation. Just a sharp stillness that settled over every seat like fog. Outside, no one could see what was coming. But inside the federal systems, and soon the media feeds, everything had already begun. At 6:12 p.m. ST, the FAA issued an official bulletin. Effective immediately, Skylink Airways is under federal review for ethics non-compliance. All loyalty and upgrade systems connected to the LCI network are temporarily suspended pending audit. The bulletin spread fast. By 6:37 p.m., 3 major news outlets had picked it up. By 7:10 p.m., a clip from Flight 783, taken by a woman in row 2, was trending on social media. The footage showed Marla Jennings slapping Walter's hand away, then zoomed in on his calm, silent face as he returned to his seat. It had no caption. It didn't need one. The top comment read, "She didn't just slap a passenger. She slapped the man who built the system that now suspended her." By 8:15 p.m., Walter Langston's name was trending across news feeds, investor channels, and political blogs. A segment aired on national TV. Langston, once dubbed the silent architect of transportation integrity, made his voice heard again today, not with words, but with consequences. Meanwhile, inside Skylink's downtown headquarters, panic was no longer quiet. 3 floors below the executive suite, general counsel teams were reviewing years of crew conduct logs, now forcibly exposed by the LCI system under Langston's emergency override. The legal department was flooded with messages from other airlines, some grateful, some terrified. And in the executive office of Skylink CEO Edward Voss, the mood was even darker. Voss had built his brand on investor confidence and smooth press. But now, the man he once laughed off as a policy dinosaur had grounded his fleet with a single call. His assistant stepped in. "Sir, the FAA wants you on tomorrow's ethics review panel. Senate Transport Committee too. You'll be under oath." Voss blinked. Under oath for what? "They're calling it an industry-wide breakdown. You'll be answering for the flight trust violations, and Langston's name is on every document they've pulled." He slumped into his chair. "But we never even thought he was flying with us," he muttered. The assistant didn't respond, because that was the point. Back at the airport, Walter Langston had already stepped off the plane. Quietly, unescorted. No press, no cameras. Just the sound of his footsteps echoing down the private terminal as his security detail followed behind. Reporters swarmed the area, but he never looked their way. He didn't need headlines. The headlines would come to him. That night, an emergency panel was called at the FAA headquarters. At the center of the long oval table was a printed dossier titled LCI Integrity Compromise, Trigger Event, Flight 7A3. On the first page was a still image of Walter's boarding pass. On the second, a summary of what had occurred: crew misconduct, physical escalation, failure to verify identity, racial profiling and service delivery ethics, dashboard override by system creator. At 11:23 p.m., the FAA voted unanimously to open a class-level ethics audit across all U.S. commercial airlines. By midnight, the CEO of Skylink had been formally subpoenaed. By dawn, 3 airlines had frozen their internal loyalty programs to avoid further audit exposure. And on every news channel in America, the same question rang: if Walter Langston could fly first class and still be treated like that, what does it say about the rest of us? In living rooms across the country, older viewers nodded slowly. They'd seen men like Walter before, quiet, brilliant, underestimated. They knew this kind of justice when they saw it. Not explosive, not loud, but permanent. Walter never asked for revenge. He designed a system that didn't need it. And now, the very industry that once ignored ethics had no choice but to live by them. 3 weeks later, in a quiet hearing room just off Capitol Hill, Walter Langston sat behind a long oak desk. There were no cameras, no speeches, just paper, protocol, and the slow, deliberate turning of pages. Across from him, members of the FAA Ethics Oversight Council flipped through a 42-page document. The title: Passenger Ethics and Crew Conduct Charter, Flight Trust Amendment 4.1. It wasn't just a new regulation. It was a rewrite of the foundation Walter had helped build 12 years ago, this time with sharper teeth. The new rules were clear. Any physical misconduct on board would trigger an instant third-party ethics audit. All crew interactions involving race, age, or disability would be independently reviewed. Every airline would be required to submit quarterly compliance scores tied directly to federal route access. And one final line, written in Walter's own pen: silence is not neutrality. Systems must protect those who do not speak. The council voted unanimously. Within 48 hours, the FAA issued a national directive. All airlines operating within U.S. airspace would be required to adopt the revised charter by Q4. Failure to comply would result in suspension of ethics-based incentives, loyalty tax breaks, and international route privileges. Then came the second announcement. The Department of Transportation was creating a permanent passenger dignity task force, overseeing ethics compliance across airlines, rail, and public travel hubs. They didn't ask Walter to join. They asked him to lead it. He declined the press conference, declined the interviews, declined the praise. But he accepted the role, not because of pride, because he knew exactly how the system could be used and misused. And this time, he wasn't just designing the protocol. He was defining the standard. The plane was boarding quietly this time. No rush, no whispers, no tension in the air. Just the soft rhythm of passengers settling in, and the gentle voice of the flight attendant offering water to those already seated. Walter Langston eased into seat 1A, same row. Different flight, different world. The crew didn't know who he was. They didn't need to. They offered him a warm towel, called him Sir with steady respect. No forced smiles, no condescension, just dignity. He looked out the window, sunlight brushing the edge of the wing. Somewhere below, systems were humming, dashboards syncing, protocols running. Not because someone shouted, because the rules had changed, and they wouldn't go back. In his hand was a small envelope. No return address, no signature, just a note inside, handwritten by a 12-year-old girl named Maya. My mom said I can sit anywhere now, even up front. Thank you for making them see us. Walter read it twice, then folded it carefully. He didn't need applause, didn't care for speeches. But this was enough. As the aircraft rolled gently toward takeoff, The attendant passed by and paused. "Mr. Langston, anything else I can get you?" He shook his head, smiling faintly. "No, you've already given me more than you know." She blinked, unsure what he meant, but moved on with quiet grace. The engines rumbled to life, and as the plane lifted into the sky, Walter leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered a line he once wrote. Long before anyone listened, "Power is not in being seen. It's in building something that outlasts you." Seat 1A flew on, but the man in it had already arrived. Did Walter do the right thing by staying silent, or would you have done more? Drop your thoughts below and let us know where you're watching from.